France, July 1944. Dawn rises over a shattered hedgerow field. The air is still, heavy with gun smoke and dew. German officers scan the distant tree line through binoculars, waiting for the usual Allied barrage to begin and end, as it always does. But this morning, something is different. A low rumble begins, not from the sky, but from the ground itself. Metal beasts crawl out from behind the hedgerows, their barrels glinting in the faint light. They move, fire, and move again, striking like thunder that never stays in one place. German forward observers panic. "It's artillery, but it's moving," one shouts into the radio. Shells crash into half-tracks, tearing apart command posts before counterfire can even be ordered. For the first time, the Wehrmacht faces an enemy whose guns don't sit still. These are not tanks. They are the self-propelled guns, a new kind of thunder that hunts. And within days, German officers will realize this single innovation is rewriting the rules of war. At the dawn of World War II, artillery was still chained to the ground. Even the most advanced armies on Earth, Germany, Britain, and the United States, treated their guns as immovable kings of the battlefield. Heavy howitzers were towed into position, unlimbered, aimed, and fired in slow, methodical sequences. It worked, until the battlefield began to move faster than the guns. When Germany unleashed Blitzkrieg in 1939, mobility became the new god of war. Panzer divisions raced through Poland and France, leaving behind even their own field artillery. Infantry and support units often lagged miles behind, unable to keep pace with tanks and mechanized troops. The U.S. Army took note and realized that traditional artillery would never survive a modern war. By 1941, American observers studying German tactics faced a troubling truth. The next war would not be fought from trenches, but from motion. Static guns were doomed. The U.S. Ordnance Department began to rethink everything, how to give artillery the same freedom of movement as tanks. But the solution wasn't simple. To mount a heavy gun on a moving platform meant combining the strength of a tank with the precision of a cannon. Two entirely different worlds of engineering. Meanwhile, in North Africa, American and British forces were learning this lesson the hard way. In the wide-open deserts, the towed artillery could barely keep up with tank columns. Every time the enemy counterattacked, gun crews were forced to abandon their weapons or die beside them. The Germans had already found their own partial answer, the Sturmgeschütz III, or Stu-G3, a low, armored assault gun designed to support infantry and destroy enemy tanks from a distance. Though not a full artillery system, it showed what mobility could mean. Firepower that could move with the battle, not behind it. Watching from afar, U.S. commanders saw something more than an idea. They saw necessity. In 1942, the first experiments began, mounting 105 mm and 155 mm howitzers on modified tank chassis. The results were crude but revolutionary. Vehicles like the M7 Priest, with its 105 mm gun and open turret, gave American artillery wings. It could drive, fire, reposition, and fire again in minutes. For the first time, the gunners no longer had to dig in. The battlefield itself became their position. This was more than a technical upgrade. It was a shift in philosophy. Artillery was no longer the slow giant that followed the infantry. It became the unseen shield that moved beside them, ready to strike wherever it was needed. By late 1943, as Allied production soared, America's self-propelled guns were rolling out by the thousands. Each division had its own mobile artillery units, the M7s for medium support, and heavier beasts like the M12 and M40 for long-range devastation. And unlike towed guns, they could keep up with tanks and infantry in real time. What Germany once dominated, speed, shock, and coordination, was now being turned against them. As the Allies prepared for the invasion of Normandy, these machines stood waiting on English soil, their crews drilling night after night. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to change modern warfare forever. The days of stationary fire were ending. The age of mobile firepower was beginning. By 1944, the Allied war machine was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Factories in Detroit and Pittsburgh thundered day and night, forging engines, hulls, and cannons with relentless precision. American industry was producing not just weapons, it was producing momentum. Among these machines were the self-propelled guns, the unsung backbone of the advancing armies. The M7 Priest, named for the pulpit-like structure that held its machine gun, became the standard bearer. Its 105mm howitzer could lob explosive shells over hills, through forests, and into German positions with deadly accuracy, then roll away before enemy counterfire could strike back. Each armored division carried these mobile guns like a shadow. When infantry advanced, the priests moved with them. When tanks clashed, they set up just behind the front line, ready to pour steel rain on enemy armor or entrenched troops. Their mobility meant they could respond to battlefield changes in minutes rather than hours. This adaptability became one of the Allies' greatest strengths. For the Germans, it was something entirely new and deeply unsettling. They were used to identifying the thunder of enemy artillery from miles away, knowing it came from fixed batteries that could be targeted or outmaneuvered. But the Americans' guns seemed to appear from nowhere. One moment, silence. The next, a barrage that shattered bunkers and morale alike. When reports began to reach German field officers in Normandy and Italy, many dismissed them as exaggerations until they experienced it firsthand. In June 1944, during the Normandy invasion, self-propelled artillery units landed alongside tanks and engineers. As soon as the beachhead was secure, they rolled inland, firing in constant coordination with infantry advances. For the first time, artillery could keep pace with the attack. German defenses, designed for traditional artillery duels, couldn't adapt. Every time they repositioned to counter Allied fire, the Americans had already moved, their mobile guns shifting like ghosts through the hedgerows. Field Marshal Rommel himself, overseeing the Atlantic Wall defenses, remarked bitterly in a field report that enemy fire is ceaseless, unpredictable, and precise. They bring their guns with them. It was not just the firepower that unnerved him, it was the speed of response, the ability to strike and vanish, leaving German observers scrambling to guess their locations. Meanwhile, American engineers continued refining their designs. The heavier M12 GMC, mounting a massive 155 50mm gun, entered service in France. It could fire shells more than 14 miles and deliver devastating blows to fortified German positions. Its successor, the M40, improved stability, fire rate, and accuracy even further. By the Battle of the Bulge in late 1944, the Germans began to realize just how dangerous these machines were. American forces could quickly form roving batteries, mobile groups of self-propelled guns that shifted along the front, confusing German scouts and bombarding key targets before disappearing into the forests. It wasn't just about destruction. It was about psychological warfare. German soldiers began to call them Wandernde Donner, wandering thunder. To the average infantryman, these roaring machines seemed unstoppable. They rained fire in waves, guided by precise forward observers and backed by limitless American ammunition. Even when German tanks counterattacked, the self-propelled guns would shift position and strike from new angles, breaking the rhythm of the battle. WWII, by 1945, self-propelled artillery had become more than a weapon. It was a doctrine. The United States had redefined how wars were fought, proving that mobility and coordination could replace sheer mass and fortification. For German commanders, it was a nightmare. Their static defenses and supply-starved batteries could not keep up. The American guns rolled ever forward, across France, through Belgium, and into the heart of Germany itself. The war was changing shape, and Germany's old tactics were being buried under a storm of moving fire. As the Allies approached the Rhine, the German High Command realized too late that the self-propelled guns weren't just support weapons. They were the engines of an unstoppable advance. Every weapon of war, no matter how powerful, is only as strong as the men who serve it. For the crews of America's self-propelled guns, this truth echoed with every shell they loaded. Every order shouted over the roar of engines and explosions. Inside an M7 Priest, space was tight. 5 men working shoulder to shoulder, their uniforms soaked in sweat, their ears ringing from constant thunder. There was the commander, scanning the battlefield through binoculars. The gunner, aligning the howitzer with deadly precision. The loader, feeding shell after shell into the breach. The driver, ready to move at a moment's notice. And the radio operator, their lifeline to the world beyond the smoke. Each shot was a symphony of coordination. They worked like parts of a living machine, disciplined, practiced, and relentless. When infantry advanced under heavy fire, these crews became their unseen guardians. Hidden behind hills or buildings, the self-propelled guns barked in response to desperate radio calls. Enemy machine gun nest, 300 meters north of the river. Moments later, the horizon would light up, the problem erased in thunder and flame. For soldiers on the ground, the sound of an M7 or M12 firing behind them was a promise. You're not alone, but on the other side of the battlefield, that same sound struck fear. German infantry, hardened by years of combat, found themselves unable to predict where the next shell would come from. Their maps and spotters were useless. Every time they thought they had pinned down an American battery, it vanished, only to reappear miles away. The self-propelled guns shattered the rhythm of traditional warfare. In World War I, artillery battles had been slow, static, and predictable. But now, mobility changed everything. Fire bases moved with the front lines. Support became fluid, responsive, alive. German officers couldn't comprehend it at first. They had relied for years on carefully calculated counter-battery fire. But how do you counter an enemy that refuses to stay still? Reports poured in from the front. Enemy artillery moves faster than our reconnaissance. Positions destroyed before engagement. We cannot locate their guns. That confusion translated into paralysis. German commanders hesitated to mount attacks because they couldn't anticipate where American firepower would fall. Entire battalions delayed movement, trapped by the fear of invisible guns lurking just beyond the next ridge. For the Americans, this was more than a tactical victory. It was a revolution in doctrine. Generals like Patton and Bradley embraced self-propelled guns as the ultimate expression of mobility warfare. Patton famously said, "Fixed fortifications are monuments to the stupidity of man." And his artillery commanders took that to heart. Their guns were never fixed. They were hunters, constantly relocating, adapting, surviving. When the Third Army broke through France after the Normandy landings, self-propelled artillery led the charge, supporting fast-moving armored columns. They crossed bridges under fire, thundered down muddy roads, and set up firing positions in open fields, sometimes firing within sight of German tanks. At times, it seemed almost suicidal, but it worked. The combination of speed, coordination, and firepower overwhelmed the enemy. While German Tiger tanks struggled to reposition or refuel, the lighter American machines darted across terrain, using sheer flexibility to win the day. One artillery officer wrote in his field notes, "We were not just firing shells, we were firing confidence." Every explosion pushed our men forward. Yet, behind that confidence lay exhaustion and sacrifice. Operating these machines was brutal. The heat inside the open hulls could exceed 45 degrees Celsius. Shells were heavy, recoil punishing, and the deafening blasts left many with permanent hearing loss. Sleep was rare, movement constant. Crews often fought for weeks without proper rest. When asked what kept them going, one gunner simply replied, "Because the men ahead of us needed us." That sense of purpose bonded them. Each crew became a family, their shared hardship forging unbreakable trust. They painted nicknames on their machines: Faith, Thunder Baby, Hell's Sermon, Superstition, Humor, or just Defiance. It helped them survive the unending march toward victory. For the Germans, facing these roving thunderclaps was demoralizing beyond measure. Even the mighty Wehrmacht, with its disciplined ranks and fearsome reputation, began to fray under the strain. The old logic of war, that artillery belonged behind the lines, was dead. In its place stood a new reality. Mobility was survival. Every road, every hedgerow, every forest could hide a gun. German soldiers spoke of the uncanny silence before bombardments, when birds stopped singing and the air felt heavy, moments before the world erupted around them. That unpredictability eroded morale faster than bullets ever could. And for the American war machine, it meant one thing: the enemy was not just being defeated, they were being broken. By early 1945, this new art of warfare had become second nature to the Allies. The self-propelled guns rolled with confidence, their crews seasoned and fearless. They no longer waited for orders to reposition. They anticipated them. Commanders trusted them to read the field, to strike where needed. When needed, this trust between men, machines, and command was the invisible power that made the Allies unstoppable. As the war entered its bloodiest final phase, the German officers began to realize that their enemy's true strength was not just in numbers. It was in movement, in adaptation, in the ability to transform even artillery, the oldest arm of war, into a weapon of speed and precision. The self-propelled gun had changed everything. War is not only fought with courage and strategy, it is fought with ideas. And in World War II, America's greatest idea was mobility. The self-propelled gun was born not from luxury or experimentation, but from necessity. By 1942, the U.S. Army faced a harsh truth. Traditional towed artillery was too slow for modern warfare. Tanks could advance kilometers in minutes, but guns had to be unhitched, aimed, fired, and moved again. A process that could take hours. In that gap, opportunities were lost, and soldiers died. American engineers, learning from both British and German designs, set out to merge the raw power of artillery with the agility of armor. The result was revolutionary: a gun that could keep up with tanks, fire on the move, and reposition before the enemy could react. The first of these innovations, the M7 Priest, was named for its pulpit-like machine gun mount. Armed with a 105 cm howitzer and built on the chassis of the M3 Lee tank, it became the backbone of mobile artillery units across Europe. It could fire a shell over 7 miles and then move before the shell even landed. This was unheard of. For the first time, artillery wasn't tied to trenches or sandbags. It was alive, moving, breathing, hunting. Then came the M12 gun motor carriage, nicknamed King Kong. Equipped with a massive 155mm gun, it was designed to destroy bunkers, bridges, and even enemy fortifications from miles away. In Normandy, these beasts blew open the concrete defenses of the Siegfried Line. Something conventional guns had failed to do. Each self-propelled gun represented a fusion of brute force and mechanical elegance. They could deliver devastating firepower, yet move with surprising grace through mud, rubble, and forests. To the men who operated them, they were more than weapons. They were salvation on tracks. Technology alone doesn't win wars. It takes leaders who understand when and how to use it. And in this, American generals like George S. Patton and Omar Bradley stood apart. Patton was obsessed with speed. He believed war was movement, that hesitation was death. To him, the self-propelled gun wasn't just a tool, it was the embodiment of his philosophy. He ordered his artillery to stay close to the tanks, never more than a few miles behind. This ensured that infantry always had immediate fire support, no matter how fast the front lines shifted. When one of his commanders asked if they should set up a fixed firing position, Patton snapped, "If your guns aren't moving, you're not fighting." This mindset turned chaos into rhythm. The sound of engines and gunfire merged into a single relentless advance, a wall of steel rolling eastward. German defenses crumbled not only under bombardment, but under the sheer psychological pressure of an enemy that never stopped coming. For the Germans, the experience was devastating. Not just physically, but mentally. They were used to predictable artillery patterns. Now, they faced a phantom enemy that struck without warning, disappeared, then struck again from another direction. Captured German diaries describe the fear vividly. The ground itself has turned against us. Their guns move faster than we can breathe. In the Battle of the Bulge, German scouts reported American artillery shells landing from directions that seemed impossible. They thought they were surrounded, when in reality, just a handful of self-propelled units were repositioning with surgical precision. This illusion of omnipresence broke morale. Some German units surrendered earlier than expected, convinced they were outnumbered 10-1. They weren't. They were simply outmaneuvered, not by manpower, but by momentum. There's a paradox in war. Sometimes, the side with the better machines kills less. The speed and accuracy of America's self-propelled guns meant battles ended faster, with fewer drawn-out engagements. Infantry didn't have to storm fortified positions blindly. The guns cleared the path. This efficiency saved lives, both Allied and civilian. Villages could be liberated without being leveled. Roads cleared without weeks of bombardment. One French farmer, watching the American advance, described it simply. The Germans hid. The Americans moved. The moving won. The success of the self-propelled gun rippled far beyond the battlefields of World War II. It redefined how armies thought about warfare. Mobility became the new gospel. After 1945, every major military power, from the Soviet Union to Britain, developed its own versions of mobile artillery. The M7, M12, and M40 laid the foundation for the modern self-propelled howitzers we see today. Sleek, automated, and terrifyingly precise. But behind that evolution lay something deeper, a belief that adaptability wins wars. That progress isn't found in comfort, but in motion. The Germans had superior tanks, Tigers, Panthers, machines of mythic power. But America had something even stronger, the willingness to rethink everything. That's what terrified German officers most. Not just the guns themselves, but the minds that built them. The realization that while they were perfecting what already existed, the Americans were inventing what came next. By the winter of 1945, that difference sealed the fate of the war in Europe. The thunder that once crawled across hedgerows now rolled through the ruins of the Reich. Each gun fired not just a shell, but a message. Innovation had conquered tradition. And for the men who rode those self-propelled guns, that truth echoed louder than any explosion. Normandy, July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra. The hedgerows of northern France, once tranquil farmlands, are now a labyrinth of death. American infantry is pinned down. German panzer divisions lie hidden behind earthen walls and thick brush, turning every advance into slaughter. For weeks, progress has been measured in meters and blood. Then, the order comes. Patton's Third Army is unleashed. The morning begins with silence. an unnatural calm before the storm. And then, the earth shakes. 1,000 engines roar to life. From behind the lines, waves of M7 Priests and M12 King Kongs roll into position. But this time, they don't stop at the usual distance. They push forward, dangerously close to the front. German observers, watching from church towers and hills, are confused. "This can't be artillery," one officer mutters. They're too close. But seconds later, the first rounds land. Massive 105mm shells tearing through enemy strongpoints. And before the Germans can retaliate, the guns are gone, moved, hidden, repositioned, like phantoms wrapped in dust and smoke. For the first time, artillery and armor are not two separate forces. They are one organism. The self-propelled guns advance with the tanks, shielding them with fire. When German machine guns open up, shells rain down in seconds. When counterfire begins, the guns shift again, vanishing before the enemy can react. American soldiers describe the scene as rolling thunder, a sound that never ends, a rhythm that never breaks. It's not just bombardment, it's motion made deadly. German officers trained in static warfare are stunned. They had prepared to face American tanks, but not this. Every time they regroup, they're hit again from another direction. The battlefield itself seems alive, unpredictable, relentless, merciless. By noon, the German front begins to crumble. Entire defensive lines collapse under the combined weight of armor and mobile firepower. Tanks push through, infantry surges forward, and artillery thunders from places the enemy swore were impossible. The hedgerow nightmare that had trapped Allied soldiers for weeks is finally broken. Cobra has succeeded, and the road to Paris is open. As American columns pour into open country, self-propelled guns lead the way, not just as fire support, but as pioneers of a new kind of warfare. No longer tethered to supply lines or fixed positions, they move like predators, constantly circling, adjusting, striking. One report from the 6th Armored Division describes it perfectly. "We fired, we moved, and we fired again. The enemy couldn't find us. Their shells landed on empty fields. German counter-battery units, elite crews trained to hunt Allied artillery, are rendered useless. They waste hours calculating coordinates that no longer matter. And as German morale cracks, the Allies' confidence soars. Crews of the M7s and M12s begin naming their guns after the thunder gods of old. Thor, Zeus, and Donner. Each machine becomes a symbol of momentum, an unrelenting wave pushing toward the heart of Europe. But the ultimate test comes months later. December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. The dead of winter. Snow falls thick over the forests of Belgium. The Germans launch their final desperate offensive, catching the Allies off guard. For days, chaos reigns. Fog blinds Allied aircraft, roads are frozen, communication lines cut. Infantry units are scattered, towns overrun. It is the darkest moment since D-Day. In the small town of Bastogne, American forces are surrounded, freezing, hungry, and outnumbered 5-1. If the Germans break through here, they could split the Allied front in two. But in the distance, through the blizzard, the rumble begins again. The thunder returns. Convoys of M7 Priests and M12s grind through the snow, their tracks crunching over ice, engines straining in the cold. They arrive without fanfare, their barrels crusted in frost, but their fire is still pure steel. Within hours, Bastogne becomes a fortress of moving fire. The self-propelled guns dig in and begin a relentless counter-barrage, striking German armor and artillery with uncanny precision. Each shot echoes through the frozen air. Not just sound, but defiance. German prisoners later described the horror. The snow glowed orange. The ground shook. We never saw where the shells came from. American units used their mobility to maximum effect, firing from one ridge, then slipping silently to another. Even in freezing conditions where engines seize and tracks jam, they keep moving. Sometimes, crews light fires under the engines just to keep them running. They refuse to stop. In one famous moment, when supplies run low and communications falter, an artillery officer radios simply, "We're still firing. Don't worry about us." That spirit, the refusal to yield, the determination to adapt, embodies the heart of America's war effort. When the weather finally clears and Allied air power returns, the tide turns. German forces, battered and demoralized, begin to retreat. Bastogne holds, the line holds, and once again, the thunder rolls forward. By the end of the Battle of the Bulge, it is clear. America's self-propelled guns are not just tools. They are a doctrine. They have proven that flexibility, mobility, and relentless coordination can triumph over even the fiercest enemy counterattacks. The Germans, once masters of Blitzkrieg, now face its perfected form. A mobile artillery blitz that outpaces their every move. For the men who fought in those icy forests, it is a victory paid in sweat, frostbite, and courage. But it is victory nonetheless, born from the thunder that refused to stop. March 1945. The German war machine is bleeding out, yet it refuses to die. Every village, every bridge, every forest is a fortress. Hitler's orders are clear: no retreat, no surrender. But the Allies are coming, and this time they bring an army that moves with its own storm. The self-propelled guns, the M7 Priest, the M12, and the new M40 Long Tom now form the backbone of Allied assault groups. Their mission: support armored thrusts toward the Rhine River, Germany's final natural barrier. Every inch of ground must be taken under fire. In the pre-dawn darkness near the Rhine River, American columns wait in silence. Engines rumble low, steam rising in the cold air. Then, at 04:30 hours, the stillness is broken. The first barrage begins. Hundreds of self-propelled guns open fire simultaneously. The night sky lights up like dawn. German observers describe it as an earthquake made of metal. The shells pound defensive positions, shredding trenches and machine gun nests. When German artillery answers back, the American guns are already gone, shifted 2 miles forward, firing again before the echoes fade. This rhythm, fire, move, fire again, creates a constant illusion of omnipresence. To German defenders, it feels as if the Americans have infinite artillery. And in many ways, they do. For the first time in the war, logistics match firepower. Fuel trucks, ammunition convoys, repair crews, all move with the advancing guns. The battlefield becomes a living organism of motion and coordination. As Patton's and Hodges' forces converge on the Rhine, the ancient city of Cologne stands as a final bastion. Its once grand cathedral towers over ruins and rubble, the last silent witness to a dying empire. When U.S. forces reach the outskirts, German resistance is fierce. Snipers haunt every window. Anti-tank guns lurk behind every pile of debris. But instead of halting for conventional artillery support, the Americans bring the guns with them. M7. Priests crawl through shattered streets, firing point-blank into fortified positions. Each blast echoes like a cathedral bell of destruction. The streets tremble. Walls collapse. German soldiers flee into the smoke. One German officer later wrote in his report, "It was not artillery anymore. It was a machine, a moving beast that devoured our defenses faster than we could rebuild them." By nightfall, Cologne falls. The city that had survived centuries of wars finally bows under the weight of mobile firepower. March 23, 1945. The Rhine River, Germany's last shield, lies ahead. For the Germans, it is sacred ground. For the Allies, it is the finish line. Operation Plunder begins under a moonless sky. As engineers prepare pontoon bridges and assault boats, thousands of self-propelled guns line the western bank. Their barrels tilt toward the far shore. A wall of steel pointed at the heart of the Reich. At 0200 hours, the signal flares rise. And then, the Rhine erupts. M40 Long Toms, M7 Priests, and M12s unleash a barrage so massive that even veteran officers are left speechless. For 40 minutes, the eastern bank becomes a firestorm. Every gun fires at maximum rate, some crews burning their gloves as shells roll hot from the breach. When the infantry finally crosses, the German defenders are stunned, deafened, disoriented. Entire battalions surrender without firing a shot. To them, it's not a battle. It's annihilation. By this point in the war, many German officers, especially artillery commanders, realize the futility of resistance. Their once feared 80mm guns, the terror of the early war years, are now outranged, outpaced, and outnumbered. In one intercepted field message from the 11th Panzer Division, a commander wrote, "Their guns move like cavalry. We hit them and they vanish. We cannot counter such speed." The German army had always prided itself on tactical innovation, on Blitzkrieg, on fast-moving warfare. Now they face their own doctrine perfected by the enemy. The hunter has become the hunted. As the Allies push east, the sound of American guns becomes constant. Day and night, towns fall, bridges burn, and columns move forward without pause. Even when supply lines stretch thin, the self-propelled crews improvise, using captured German fuel, scavenged parts, and pure determination. For the men inside those metal beasts, it's exhaustion beyond words. Crews sleep against the recoil guards, eat cold rations between barrages, and keep firing. They are no longer just soldiers. They are the heartbeat of the advance. By early April, the German Western Front implodes. The Ruhr pocket, once an industrial stronghold, becomes a cauldron of encircled divisions. Self-propelled artillery units ring the area, pounding the trapped enemy day and night. German radio intercepts record despairing messages. "We are surrounded by the thunder. There is nowhere left to hide." When the dust finally settles, over 300,000 German troops surrender. The Rhine has been crossed, the Ruhr destroyed, and the road to Berlin stands open. In the end, it isn't just tanks or bombers that break Germany's will. It's the constant, moving fire of America's self-propelled guns. They embody everything the German command once believed impossible: mobility, precision, and relentless endurance. To the officers who once ruled the battlefields of Europe, it is a bitter truth. The machine of Blitzkrieg has met its evolution, and this time it wears a white star. May 1945. The war in Europe is ending. The German Reich, once the most feared military machine on earth, lies in ruins. Cities are silent, factories gutted, roads filled with refugees and broken armor. But for the men of the U.S. Army's self-propelled artillery battalions, the Priests, the Long Toms, the Mobile Thunder. Silence feels unnatural. For years, their world was noise. Recoil, smoke, and flame. Now, there is only wind. They park their M7s in rows, their barrels still blackened from the last barrage at the Ruhr. Mechanics walk around them like mourners at a funeral. These machines had carried them through hell, and somehow brought them home. The statistics of destruction are staggering. Between 1942 and 1945, the United States produced more than 25,000 self-propelled artillery pieces of various types. By the war's end, American mobile firepower had outnumbered and outgunned the combined total of every Axis vehicle of similar class. In the European theater alone, self-propelled units fired millions of shells across France, Belgium, and Germany. Bridges fell, tanks burned, fortresses crumbled. But beyond the raw power, what truly shocked German officers was efficiency. Captured Wehrmacht documents after the war revealed deep admiration and fear for the logistical discipline behind these machines. One German general wrote in interrogation, "The Americans did not just have artillery. They had a factory on wheels. We could destroy a dozen guns, and by morning, a dozen more would be firing." That statement summed up a bitter reality. Germany had run out of fuel, steel, and time. America had turned industry itself into a weapon. When Allied intelligence teams questioned captured German artillery commanders, many spoke less about defeat and more about disbelief. How had a nation once mocked for its slow mobilization built a force that moved faster than tanks, fired harder than field guns, and seemed to never tire? They analyzed American design blueprints, production records, and tactical reports. The conclusion was unanimous. Self-propelled artillery had redefined modern warfare. The old doctrine of static batteries, guns dug into fixed emplacements, was dead. Mobility, flexibility, and continuous support had won the war of attrition. Some German officers admitted that if they had developed comparable mobility by 1943, the Eastern Front might have lasted longer. But by then, it was already too late. Their divisions were trapped in a war designed for movement, armed only for defense. For the Allies, victory brought not only relief, but revelation. Generals across Europe studied the reports from the field, realizing that the self-propelled gun was no longer just support. It had become a central character in mechanized warfare. The M7 Priests. Success inspired the post-war M44 and M52 designs. The British developed their own line of mobile guns, like the Sexton, modeled after the American system. The Soviets, watching closely from the east, began mass-producing their own heavy self-propelled guns. The ISU-152, the beast killer of later decades. A silent revolution had begun. No army would ever again enter battle without mobile artillery, but behind every innovation was a price. Thousands of artillerymen had been killed or maimed inside their machines. When a shell struck a self-propelled gun, the result was instant incineration, ammunition cooking off, armor plates bending inward like paper. The smell of burnt oil and steel lingered long after the fighting ended. For survivors, it became a scent that would follow them home, buried deep in their memories. Some never spoke of it again. One veteran of the 3rd Armored Division wrote years later, "People talk about the tanks, the planes, the heroes, but we were the thunder. We lived inside it, and sometimes we became part of it." His words capture the paradox of victory. Immense pride, shadowed by quiet grief. By the summer of 1945, as the last M7s were shipped back to depots or scrapped for peacetime steel, the world had changed. Every future battlefield, from Korea to the deserts of the Middle East, would echo with lessons born in Normandy and the Ruhr. Self-propelled guns had proven something deeper than tactical genius. They had shown that mobility was survival, that the ability to move, to adapt, could overcome even the strongest fortifications. And though the guns now stood silent, their legacy roared through the decades that followed. When the last echoes of World War II faded, the world entered a new kind of war. One fought not across muddy fields, but in the cold tension of ideology and technology. And at the heart of that transformation was a single lesson: mobility wins wars. The self-propelled guns that had thundered across Europe were more than tools of destruction. They were symbols of a new mindset, a belief that speed, adaptability, and industrial precision could defeat even the most entrenched enemy. Within months of the German surrender, American military planners began dissecting every battlefield report. Officers from Patton's Third Army, Eisenhower's headquarters, and the Armored Command gathered around long tables, maps covered in red and blue lines. They studied not just how the M7 Priest had performed, but why it had performed so well. The answer was clear: seamless coordination. Infantry, armor, and artillery moved as one body, guided by radio communication, aerial reconnaissance, and the constant availability of mobile firepower. That discovery would become the blueprint for combined arms warfare, a doctrine that defined modern armies for the next 70 years. Every future conflict, from Korea to Iraq, carried the DNA of those World War II battlefields. But America wasn't the only one taking notes. Across the smoldering ruins of Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union was studying too. And they learned fast. By 1946, Soviet engineers at Kirov and Chelyabinsk had produced a new generation of heavy self-propelled guns, the ISU-122 and ISU-152. These vehicles were not just copies. They were statements. Stalin wanted the Red Army to field machines that could not only match, but overwhelm Western firepower. And so began the arms race. Not of ideology alone, but of engineering philosophy. The Americans refined mobility and logistics. The Soviets perfected armor and shock power. The stage was set for a world divided not just by borders, but by doctrines of war. As the Cold War tightened its grip, NATO was formed, and with it, a vast modernization of Western artillery systems. The lessons of the M7 Priest evolved into new machines like the M44, M52, and later, the M109 Paladin, each faster, stronger, and deadlier than before. But this time, the mission was not to conquer. It was to deter. In war games across Germany and France, NATO commanders rehearsed what they called rapid response zones, regions where mobile artillery could reposition in minutes to counter a Soviet advance. The philosophy was simple. The side that could fire, move, and fire again would survive. Every soldier who climbed into an M109 in the 1970s carried a silent inheritance from the crews of 1944. Their weapons had changed, but their purpose remained the same: deliver thunder, then disappear before the enemy could react. Even decades later, the veterans of those early self-propelled guns became quiet teachers to a new generation. Some joined design bureaus, advising engineers on crew ergonomics, recoil absorption, and fire discipline. Others wrote memoirs, understated, humble, filled with the raw realism of men who had seen too much. One such veteran, Sergeant William "Red" Davis, once wrote, "We thought we were just gunners, but what we really were messengers. Every shell we fired said the same thing: move forward, never stop." His words echoed in military academies for years, a reminder that the power of technology means little without the will to keep pushing. By the late 20th century, nearly every major military power had developed its own lineage of self-propelled artillery. The British had their AS-90, the French their Caesar, the Germans their PZH-2000, and the Soviets their 2S-19. Mstais. All were born from one revelation: the gun must move with the soldier. In wars across Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf, that principle proved itself again and again. Artillery was no longer a weapon of the rear lines. It had become the moving heartbeat of the modern battlefield. Perhaps the greatest legacy, however, was not mechanical, it was mental. The self-propelled gun changed how commanders thought about distance, timing, and control. It turned the battlefield from a fixed grid into a living organism, fluid, adaptable, and dangerous. It made warfare less about territory and more about momentum, and in that realization lay the essence of modern strategy. Victory belongs not to the strongest, but to the side that refuses to stand still. From the first M7 that rolled through Tunisia to the latest Paladin deployed in Europe today, the lineage remains unbroken. Each machine carries a silent whisper from the past, the echo of men who learned that firepower alone was not enough. You had to move with it. You had to believe in it. You had to face the storm and drive through it. The world would never again fear static fortresses. It would fear the guns that could appear anywhere, at any time, and vanish before the smoke cleared. The self-propelled gun had forever changed the rhythm of war. When we look back at World War II, we often remember the great battles, Normandy, the Bulge, Berlin, but beneath those victories lay something quieter, something more enduring, the evolution of how humanity learned to move its power. The self-propelled gun was not glamorous. It wasn't the mighty tank charging through smoke, nor the fighter soaring through clouds. It was a worker of war, loud, uncelebrated, relentless. And yet, it changed everything. Because in its steel frame was an idea far greater than destruction. The idea that progress comes from movement. That when you adapt, when you push forward, no matter the obstacle, you reshape the world around you. For the American soldiers who rode those machines, it wasn't just about defeating the enemy. It was about outlasting fear, outthinking chaos, and learning that success comes not from where you stand, but from how far you're willing to go. Their German counterparts, though fierce and disciplined, found themselves trapped by their own rigidity. They built fortresses while the world learned to move. And history, as it always does, favored motion over stagnation. Today, as we watch new wars fought with drones, satellites, and digital maps, the echo of that lesson remains. Technology may evolve, but the principle stays the same. Those who can think and move faster than fear will always define the future. So, the next time you see an armored column rolling across a dusty plain, or a missile battery deploying in minutes, remember, this is the legacy of that forgotten invention from 1942. A reminder that progress, whether in war or in life, belongs to those who refuse to stay still. Because history doesn't reward the ones who wait. It remembers the ones who move forward with purpose, with courage, and with fire.